Deep in the icy void of space far from any star, the ship lay dormant. It had been frozen in time, hidden away on a forgotten planet. The metal hull of the ship, once sleek and strong, was now covered in layers of frozen dust and ice. Inside, the crew's bodies were in stasis, preserved for centuries, waiting for the right moment. But that moment was finally coming. A sudden pulse of energy cut through the silence, shattering the stillness like a shockwave. The frozen ship stirred. Its systems, long dormant, slowly flickered to life. Lights flickered weakly, and the hum of machinery began to echo in the cold, dark chambers of the ship. A soft beep rang through the empty halls, then another, and another. The ship's heart was beating again. Inside, in the stasis pods, the crew's eyes slowly fluttered open. Their bodies, frozen for so long, were now waking up to a world they thought they would never see. It had been a long time since the ship had been on any mission. They had all been waiting for something they had been trained to respond to. But what was it? What had awakened them from their deep, cold slumber? Captain Sarah Nielsen, the leader of the crew, was the first to rise from her stasis pod. She blinked her eyes, struggling to focus. The coldness of the room made her shiver, and her body ached as if it had been broken and rebuilt. The rest of the crew began to stir, their faces filled with confusion, fear, and curiosity. They didn't know what had happened or why they were awake, but they knew they had been summoned for a reason. "Status report," Captain Nielsen ordered, her voice rough, but filled with authority. She moved to the nearest control panel, her fingers trembling as she typed in the commands. The screen flickered, showing her only fragments of data. The ship was still running on emergency power, but the signal that had triggered their awakening was growing stronger. "Captain, we have a problem," Lieutenant Garrett said, his voice cutting through the cold silence of the room. He was staring at a screen filled with strange data. "The signal. It's not just any signal, it's coming from Earth." Earth. The name of their home planet stirred something deep within them. It had been decades, no, centuries, since they had last heard from Earth. They had been sent on a mission to explore deep space far beyond the reach of human civilization. Their task had been to search for new worlds, but that mission had ended when they were forced into stasis after their ship was damaged. Earth had seemed so far away then, a distant memory of a world they had once known. But now, Earth was calling them. "What's going on?" Captain Nielsen demanded. "Why are we hearing a signal from Earth? Is it a distress call?" Garrett nodded slowly, his fingers moving rapidly across the console. "It seems like it. The signal is faint, but it's unmistakable. It's human. Someone is reaching out. To us. They need help." The crew stared at the screen in disbelief. A message from Earth after all this time? Could it be true? They had thought humanity had long forgotten them. But now Earth was calling. They needed help, and it was up to the crew of the frozen ship to answer. The captain turned to her crew, determination filling her eyes. "Prepare for launch, we're going to answer that call." But as they moved to start the ship's systems, something felt wrong. The ship's sensors picked up a strange disturbance, a ripple in the fabric of space. It wasn't natural. It was something out of place. "Captain, we're not alone," Lieutenant Garrett said, his voice tight with concern. The crew gathered around the screen, their faces filled with unease. There on the monitor was something they hadn't expected, a massive fleet of unknown ships heading straight for Earth. "Who are they?" the captain muttered, staring at the screen. "Why are they heading to Earth?" "We need to warn them," Garrett said urgently. "We need to help." The ship was still barely operational. They had only just begun to wake up from their long slumber, and they weren't ready for a fight. The ship's weapons were powered down. Its shields were weak, and the crew was out of shape after centuries in stasis. But the message from Earth was clear. It was time to fight back. Humanity was under threat, and they were the only ones who could do something about it. The captain's voice rang out, steady and clear. "We'll do whatever it takes. Power up the engines. Get us moving. We're not just going to sit here." Crew quickly got to work. pushing the ship's systems to their limits. The ship's engines roared to life, and the frozen ship, which had once been a tomb, now began to move. Slowly at first, then faster as the ship picked up speed. Outside, the stars blurred into lines as they tore through the void of space, heading straight toward Earth. The tension in the air was palpable. They were going to face a battle unlike any they had ever known. But this wasn't just a mission anymore. This was a fight for the survival of humanity, and they were the only ones who could save it. As the ship moved forward, a sense of urgency filled the air. The crew didn't know what awaited them, but they knew one thing for sure. Earth needed them, and they would do whatever it took to answer that call. As the frozen ship made its way through the void, the crew felt an overwhelming sense of anticipation. The ship's systems were slowly coming online, but they still felt the weight of centuries of dormancy pressing on them. The crew had been in stasis for so long, their bodies aching with the effects of deep sleep. But their minds were sharp, focused on the mission ahead. The signal from Earth was growing stronger, louder, but it was still faint. "Captain, we're receiving another message," Garrett called out from the communications deck. His voice was tense, his fingers dancing over the console. The message was barely decipherable, filled with static and distortion, but they could make out enough. "Play it," Captain Nielsen said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. Earth was calling them. After all this time, after everything that had happened, Earth was reaching out. But what could this message mean? The static cleared, and a crackling voice broke through the silence. It was weak, strained, and desperate. "This is Earth. We are under attack and we need your help. Please." The message cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The distress call was like a knife to their hearts, a cry for help, a plea from their home planet. And then nothing. "Damn it," Captain Nielsen muttered, her fists clenched. What happened to Earth? Why did they wait so long to contact us? What is attacking them? The question hung in the air unanswered. The ship's systems hummed with activity as they tried to decipher the message. But the more they tried, the less they understood. It was clear Earth was in danger, but the details were murky. What could threaten Earth, a world known for its resilience? What kind of enemy could still be lurking out there after all these years? "We need to accelerate. The sooner we reach Earth, the better," Garrett said. He was already powering up the ship's engines, pushing them to their limits. The ship's massive engines groaned in protest, but they began to hum with increasing power. The journey ahead would be long, but they couldn't waste time. Not now. Captain Nielsen walked to the observation window and gazed out into the vastness of space. The stars stretched out before them, an endless sea of twinkling points of light. But it wasn't the stars that held her attention. It was the strange disturbance they had detected earlier. The unknown fleet, closing in on Earth. "They're getting closer," she murmured, watching the unknown ships grow larger on the sensors. "Who are they? What do they want with Earth?" Lieutenant Garrett looked over his shoulder, his expression grim. "Captain, it's not just a fleet. There's something else. A massive energy signature. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. It's coming from the heart of the enemy's fleet. It's like a weapon." "A weapon?" Nielsen repeated, her heart skipping a beat. What kind of weapon could generate that much power? The thought filled the room with dread. A weapon powerful enough to destroy Earth? They had no choice but to stop it. They couldn't let their homeworld fall. "We have to move faster," Nielsen said, her voice resolute. "If they have a weapon that strong, we won't make it in time unless we push this ship beyond its limits." The crew quickly set to work, working in unison as they prepared for the long journey ahead. Every system, every piece of equipment, was pushed to its breaking point. They had no choice but to take risks. There was no time for hesitation. "We should be able to reach Earth in a few hours if we keep this pace," Garrett said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "But there's a problem. The energy signature we detected, it's not just a weapon, it's calling something. I'm not sure what, but it's like the ship itself is responding." Captain Nielsen narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Garrett turned toward her, his face pale. It's as if the ship is communicating with the enemy. It's almost like they're calling to each other. A chill ran down the captain's spine. Was Earth really under attack? Or was this something more? A deeper connection between their enemies and the forgotten ship they were aboard? Can we block the signal? Nielsen asked, her voice sharp. Garrett shook his head. Not without risking total system failure. If we interrupt the signal, we might not make it through the journey. We'd be flying blind. Nielsen stared at the screen, her mind racing. Could this be some kind of trap? Could the ship they had, Awakened, be part of the very thing threatening Earth? It was all too much to comprehend, too many unknowns. The crew stood in uneasy silence as the ship moved closer to the unknown fleet. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break. They were heading into the heart of danger with no clear answers. But one thing was certain: Earth needed them, and they would have to face whatever lay ahead, whether they were ready or not. Prepare for battle, Nielsen said finally, her voice cold and determined. We're not just answering a distress call, we're going to save Earth, whatever it takes. The ship surged forward, its engines roaring as it pushed deeper into the unknown. The crew, fully aware of the risks, stood together. The fate of their homeworld rested in their hands, and they would not fail. The journey through the cold, endless void of space felt like an eternity. Time was distorted in the vast expanse, and the crew of the frozen ship could sense the weight of their mission pressing down on them with each passing moment. The once dormant ship now roared with life, its engines pulsing as they pushed through the dark expanse toward Earth. The ship's course was set, but uncertainty loomed at every turn. The unknown fleet ahead, coupled with the strange, almost malevolent energy signature, made it impossible to ignore the growing feeling of dread. Inside the control room, Captain Nielsen stood tall, her eyes locked onto the forward screen, watching. The stars stretch and blur into lines as the ship's speed increased. Each minute felt like an hour, each second like a lifetime. The crew moved swiftly, coordinating systems, monitoring the ship's progress, but the unease never left. Captain, the enemy fleet is still out there, Garrett said, his voice tight with tension. They've changed their course. They're heading straight toward Earth's orbit now at full speed. Whatever they're planning, it's coming fast. Nielsen's jaw tightened. We won't get there in time if they don't stop. What kind of force are we up against? Unknown, Garrett replied, his fingers flying over the controls. But the energy readings, they're off the charts. It's like nothing we've ever seen. Their ship's power levels are insane. Whatever weapon they have, it could destroy entire fleets in a single blow. The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. They were on a collision course with an enemy so powerful that it might take more than just the ship's crew to stop them. The captain's mind raced, trying to piece together what she had learned so far. The frozen ship they had awakened was humanity's only hope. But how could it defeat such a monstrous foe? We need more intel. Can we get a closer look at their ships? Captain Nielsen asked, her voice calm despite the storm brewing inside. Garrett worked the controls, his brow furrowing as he tried to access more detailed scans of the enemy fleet. I'm trying to get a clearer read, Captain, but the interference from their energy signal is making it difficult. We might need to get closer. Closer? Nielsen repeated, raising an eyebrow. How much closer? Garrett hesitated for a moment. If we go too close, they'll detect us. We'll be sitting ducks. The captain knew that the stakes had never been higher. We don't have a choice. We need to know what we're dealing with. As the ship surged forward, the crew worked tirelessly, each member focused on the task at hand. The ship's systems, though ancient, were starting to respond more reliably, but the repairs weren't enough to make them feel truly ready. They had no idea what awaited them, only that it was something beyond their understanding. Meanwhile, the energy signature from the enemy fleet continued to grow stronger. It felt like an invisible force, pulling them toward the unknown. Something about the signal. It was almost like a call, not just from the enemy, but from the ship itself. A silent connection between the two, drawing them closer and closer to a battle that would change everything. The ship's sensors began to flicker and beep. "Captain, the fleet. They're sending something our way," Garrett called out. "It looks like some kind of projectile, fast-moving, but it's not on a collision course. It's redirecting itself toward us." "Brace for impact," Nielsen ordered. She barely had time to react before a blinding flash of light flooded the control room. The ship shook violently as an enormous energy blast raced past them, narrowly missing the ship's hull. The impact left a deafening silence in its wake. "Status?" Captain Nielsen demanded, her grip tightening on the chair as the crew scrambled to assess the damage. "Shield integrity holding, but the blast was close," Garrett said, his voice strained. "We're lucky it didn't hit us directly." The Tau ship's crew stood in stunned silence. This was no ordinary enemy. They had the power to strike from afar, almost effortlessly. Their technology was light years ahead of anything humanity had ever seen, but they had only narrowly escaped this attack. How many more would there be before they reached Earth? "Move us into evasive maneuvers," Nielsen commanded. "We can't afford to be sitting targets." "Captain," Lieutenant Yvonne called, from the tactical station, "we've detected something else, something even more worrying. A massive distortion in the fabric of space itself, right ahead of us. It's like a wormhole. But it's not natural." "A wormhole?" The captain's mind raced. Could this be their way in? Could it be a shortcut to Earth? Or was it another trap set by the enemy? "I think we should avoid it, Captain," Garrett said, his voice shaky. "The readings are unstable. If we enter that thing, we might end up anywhere, lost in space, out of control." Captain Nielsen stood silent for a moment. The crew was divided on what to do. There was a sense of urgency. Earth was at risk, but rushing into an unknown hazard could mean their doom. "Take us closer to the distortion," Nielsen ordered. "We need to see it for ourselves. If it can help us get to Earth faster, we'll take the risk. But we can't keep running forever. We're not going to outrun the enemy." The crew hesitated but followed orders. As they neared the strange distortion in space, the air grew thick with tension. The unknown loomed large before them, a swirling mass of energy and light, bending the stars in unnatural ways. They were about to enter the unknown, and everything they knew, everything they had fought for, was on the line. As the frozen ship hurtled toward the distortion, the atmosphere inside the control room was tense, thick with the sense that they were on the edge of something monumental. The massive swirling mass of energy ahead seemed to pulse with an almost sentient force, pulling the ship closer despite the crew's cautious efforts to maintain control. The stars around them twisted, warping as if reality itself was bending to the will of whatever force lay beyond the wormhole. "Steady," Captain Nielsen ordered, her voice unwavering. She stood tall, her gaze locked onto the chaotic space ahead. The ship groaned in protest, its systems pushed to their limits as the crew fought to stay on course. "Get ready to drop the shields if we need to go through." "Captain, Garrett's voice faltered for a moment. He stared at the readings, his face pale. "The energy levels, they're rising. This isn't just a distortion, Captain. It's a doorway, a gateway." The ship shuddered again, the force of its engines struggling against the pull of the mysterious force. The crew worked together, making frantic adjustments to the controls. No one knew what would happen if they passed through the distortion, but they had no choice. Earth needed them, and they were running out of time. "Prepare for possible jump," Captain Nielsen said, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. The void outside had become a swirling mass of colors and lights, an unnatural storm in the heavens. It was like a cosmic firestorm, the stars themselves, burning in a violent fiery blaze. Then, it happened. The ship was jerked violently as the gravitational pull intensified. An overwhelming flash of light enveloped the vessel, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. The controls went dead, the crew's desperate calls swallowed up by the nothingness around them. "Where are we?" Yvonne asked, her voice trembling as the lights flickered on and off in the control room. Nielsen's eyes darted to the viewport. What she saw made her blood run cold. They were no longer in the same space. The stars had shifted. They weren't in their galaxy anymore. Ahead of them, a fiery mass loomed. A planet, but unlike anything they had ever seen. It was engulfed, in flames, its surface burning like the heart of a star. "That's not Earth," Garrett said, his voice barely a whisper. "What the hell happened?" Lieutenant Yvonne's words cut through the tense silence. "Did we make a wrong turn?" The captain was silent for a moment, her mind racing. "No. We're still on course for Earth, but this is something else. Something we didn't expect." Their ship was caught in the gravitational pull of the strange planet, its fiery surface lighting up the dark void with an unholy glow. The planet appeared to be on the brink of destruction, its surface constantly shifting as if it were being consumed by some terrible unseen force. The very sight of it sent shivers down their spines. Suddenly, the sensors came back online, and a new reading flashed on the screen. It was unmistakable. Energy signature. "It's coming from the planet," Garrett said, his eyes wide. "But that's not the biggest problem. There's something else, something in orbit around it." On the screen, another ship appeared. But this one was massive, unlike anything the crew had seen before. It was surrounded by a network of smaller ships, almost like an army of drones. The enormous vessel's surface shimmered with an unnatural light, as if it were cloaked in some kind of energy field. And on its hull, glowing ominously, was the same energy signature they had traced back to the enemy fleet. "It's them," Nielsen whispered. "The enemy fleet. But how did they get here? And what is this place?" Garrett's hands flew over the controls, trying to make sense of the readings. "Captain, there's something else, that massive ship. It's sending a signal. It's almost like it's calling to the other ships. It's like a beacon, and it's drawing the smaller ships closer." Nielsen's eyes narrowed. "It's a trap. They've set it up as a staging point, waiting for us to come through the gateway." "Captain," Garrett said urgently, "the ship's systems are still unstable. If we stay here much longer, we'll be caught in the gravitational field of the planet. It could pull us in, and we won't be able to escape." The ship groaned as the pull of the planet's gravity grew stronger. Panic began to rise in the crew as they felt the ship start to drift toward the fiery surface. It was clear now they were trapped. The only option was to fight their way out. "Can we disable their ships?" Nielsen asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. They couldn't let the enemy reach Earth. They had to stop them here, and now before the weapon they had detected could be unleashed. "We can try," Garrett said, his voice filled with grim determination. "But our ship is far from ready. It'll be a tough fight." The captain stood, her face resolute. "We'll make it work. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We'll break through their fleet and get back on course for Earth. It's our only shot." The crew scrambled to execute the captain's orders, knowing the odds were stacked against them. Outside, the battle was already beginning. A massive flare erupted from the enemy flagship, sending a shockwave through space. The smaller ships moved in tight formation, ready to strike, and they were coming for the frozen ship. "Here they come," Garrett shouted, his voice tight with urgency. With the enemy closing in and the fiery planet looming dangerously close, the frozen ship's crew braced themselves for the fight of their lives. Humanity's future and their own was on the line, and there was no turning back now. The cosmic blaze ahead burned brighter now, as though the very heavens were protesting their intrusion. The ship was caught in a deadly dance with the massive, hostile fleet. The crew had no choice but to face their greatest fear, an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. But despite the odds, they could not afford to turn back. Earth's survival hung in the balance. "Captain, we're in range. The enemy fleet's weapons are charging," Garrett called out, his voice strained under the weight of the situation. "They're targeting us." Captain Nielsen's mind raced, her thoughts clear and focused despite the overwhelming pressure. The ship's systems were far from optimal, and the enemy's fleet was vast. But there was one thing she knew for certain. They had to fight or humanity would be lost. "Activate all systems," she commanded, her voice unwavering. "Prepare the weapons. Get us out of this gravitational pull now." The crew sprang into action, pushing the ship's already overstrained systems to their limits. The ship groaned, its engines straining against the immense gravitational force pulling them closer to the fiery planet. Outside, the enemy fleet closed in, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. "Shields are holding, Captain, but they're starting to falter," Yvonne called out from the tactical station, sweat dripping from her brow as she worked frantically. "We're going to take hits if we don't move fast." The tension inside the ship was palpable. Every crew member was focused, every eye on the battle ahead. The once forgotten ship, now their only weapon, was humanity's last hope. There would be no more chances. No more second chances. Nielsen glanced out the viewport, her gaze locked on the enemy ships. The massive flagship was the heart of the enemy fleet, and it radiated power, its energy signature pulsating like a heart beating at full strength. It was surrounded by a swarm of smaller ships, each one ready to strike. If they didn't break through the fleet soon, the enemy would rip them apart. "Prepare to engage," Nielsen said, her tone steely. "We'll make it through, no matter the cost." "Captain, the enemy flagship is locking onto us," Garrett warned. "They're about to fire." Just as the warning echoed through the room, a blinding light shot from the enemy flagship, a beam of pure energy that sliced through the void toward them. The crew braced for impact, but the ship lurched to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. The ship's hull vibrated with the near miss, but they had managed to evade the first strike. "We're not done yet," Nielsen shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. "Full thrust now. Break through their formation." The ship's engines roared to life as they pushed forward, blasting through the swarm of enemy ships. The frozen ship's weapon systems activated with a ferocity that surprised even the crew. Despite being damaged and old, the weapons were deadly. Energy blasts rang out, striking enemy ships with pinpoint accuracy. One after another, smaller ships disintegrated in fiery explosions, lighting up the space around them. "We're not just fighting for Earth," Nielsen murmured as she watched the chaos unfold outside. "We're fighting for humanity's future." But even as they made their way through the enemy ranks, the flagship's relentless attacks continued. Each blow from its massive guns sent shockwaves through the frozen ship, and the crew felt each hit as if it were their own body being torn apart. The shields were buckling, and the ship was starting to show visible signs of damage. "Captain, we're taking too much damage," Garrett shouted, his voice filled with panic. "The hull integrity is failing. We can't keep this up much longer." Nielsen gritted her teeth. The frozen ship was breaking apart, but they couldn't stop. Earth needed them, and they couldn't fail now. "Push the engines harder," she commanded. "We need to make it through, just a little longer." As the ship tore through the enemy formation, Nielsen could see it, the opening, a small gap between the enemy flagship and its smaller ships. It was their only chance to get through, but to make it, they would have to risk everything. "Full speed. Ahead," Nielsen yelled, her eyes locked on the gap. "Now!" With a final surge of power, the frozen ship blasted forward, narrowly avoiding another massive energy blast from the flagship. The ship's engines roared, its hull creaking under the strain. The gap grew closer. The ship surged forward, barely, holding together, and then, just as they neared the opening, the flagship fired again. This time, the blast hit. The ship shook violently, and the entire crew was thrown off balance. Sparks flew from the control panels as the lights flickered and died. The frozen ship veered wildly, spinning uncontrollably toward the enemy fleet's central formation. "Hold on," Nielsen shouted. The ship was spiraling, but she wasn't giving up. The crew scrambled, trying to regain control, but the damage was severe. The ship was on the verge of falling apart. Yet somehow, by some miracle, the ship shot through the enemy fleet, its engines blazing with all the remaining power they had left. As they cleared the enemy formation, Nielsen looked at the screen. They had done it, for now at least. They had escaped the fleet's immediate grasp, but the battle was far from over. They were still in the enemy's sights. "Status?" Nielsen asked, breathing heavily. "We're through," Garrett replied, his voice hoarse. "But the ship? It's barely holding together. We've got to get to Earth before we lose everything." The crew was battered, bruised, but alive. Their journey wasn't over yet. They had survived the first wave, but the true battle was just beginning. The enemy had only been a part of what lay ahead. The real threat, whatever that was, still loomed on the horizon. As the frozen ship pushed forward toward Earth, the crew braced for what was to come. Their fight had just begun,